Hi, I'm Josh Doody. This is a live workshop that I did with Orlando Devs and the Iron Yard Orlando campus on a salary negotiation crash course. Unfortunately, we lost some of the early material due to some technical difficulties, so I'm going to screencast the first few minutes, and then you'll see we'll jump over to the live presentation once we catch up to the part where we have the recorded material. I'm Josh Doody. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Josh Doody there. I'm the author of Fearless Salary Negotiation and of the Fearless Salary Negotiation video courses, which you'll hear a little bit more about later on in this presentation. I'm a computer and electrical engineer and an MBA, all from the University of Florida. And I spent about 10 years of my career in the talent management or talent development industry, which is focused on software to help businesses manage employee performance, set goals, work on career and succession planning, and manage employee compensation. So I have a background in employee compensation in particular that led me to spend a little bit more time thinking about salary negotiation and how salaries are set, and then how I can help people maximize their salaries when they change jobs or if they decide to stay put. And today I'm going to be talking about a salary negotiation crash course, which is a quick overview of everything you need to maximize your salary at your current job and your next one. We'll start by talking about how to prepare for your interview. Preparing for interviews is the main way that you can differentiate yourself from other similarly qualified candidates. So we'll walk through some things that could help you prepare to stand out from the pack as you interview at your new job. Then we'll do a strategy overview for salary negotiation. I'll give you a really quick summary of my salary negotiation method, which can help you increase your starting salary when you're starting a new job after you've aced your interview and gotten a solid job offer. And then I'll switch gears to what if you're staying put. So this is for folks who are happy where they are and maybe want a promotion or a raise and aren't looking to change companies and negotiate a new starting salary at a new company. So the first thing that you need to do is prepare for your interviews when you're looking for a new job. I recommend that you start with some basic research. And what I mean by basic research is really as basic as it gets. And that's spend some time on the company's website. Go there, see what job openings they have, see what they're trying to do with their company, try to learn their mission statement. Just get a sense of what it is that they do, who their customers are, if they're trying to grow, what their specialty is, and those other little things that can help you to stand out when you give answers to questions later on in your interview. When you're prepared, it'll really show to your interviewer and to anybody else that you talk to. And I have personal experience with this as a hiring manager. I would notice immediately if someone came into an interview and didn't know what I was here for, what I was trying to fill in terms of positions, what our company did. It really sticks out. And so if you go into an interview and you don't know anything about the company you're interviewing with, it'll be obvious to the interviewer, and they'll wonder if you're not engaged enough to learn about the company before you interview, how engaged will you be once you start working there? So that can be a red flag if you're not prepared for your interview. Once you've learned everything you can learn from perusing their website, looking for open job descriptions and that sort of thing, then I recommend that you jump over to Google, especially for public companies, but really for any company, and see what else is out there about the company that you can learn. So you'll look for blog posts written about them, maybe press releases from them. You could look into their stock performance and financial performance of the last couple of years if they happen to be public. Just try to learn more about the company, how strong they are, what they're into and what they're known for, and all those sorts of things, so that when you interview, it's obvious that you're very familiar with the company, and then you can use the information that you found in this preparation phase to give really good answers to the questions that you're asked. It's important to think consistently about what the company's story is. And what I mean by this is that your goal as a candidate who's interviewing with the company is to demonstrate that their story will be better if you're a part of it. That's really your mission when you're interviewing. And so first you have to understand what their story is. So think a lot about what their pain points are and what goals they're trying to achieve and where they're going as a company. Because as you answer questions throughout your interview process, you can use those things as fodder for answers that you give that will demonstrate that you know about the company, but also that the company will be better if you're on the team. And that means they'll be more likely to make a job offer, and that the job offer they make will be as strong as possible later on in the interview process. There's one other thing that I want to talk about that is a really common part of the interview process, but is actually a sneaky salary negotiation technique. And I call it the dreaded salary question. This is a question that you'll usually be asked during the pre-interview phase of your interview process. And this will be asked by a recruiter or sometimes the hiring manager, but usually the recruiter. This is the dreaded salary question. So where are you right now in terms of salary, and what are you looking for if you make this move? And it can seem really innocuous. It doesn't seem like there's much going on here. Your inclination might be to just answer this question and try to move on to the next step in the interview process. And so you can see this question as sort of a gatekeeper. If I just answer this question, then I can get to the next question that they're going to ask me and we'll just move on. But the reality is that there's a lot of information here that you could give away that could put you at a pretty significant disadvantage later on in the interview process. So let me break this question down for you. And then I'll also walk through what my recommended answer is for the dreaded salary question so that you have this ready and you can prepare for this question in case it sneaks up on you during the interview process. So there are two things that are really being asked for here. The first one is your current salary, and that's what you see in the first half of the dreaded salary question, which is, so where are you right now in terms of salary? So they're asking you for your current salary. The second part of the dreaded salary question is, and what are you looking for if you make this move? So that's your desired salary. So the two things that you're being asked for here are your current salary and your desired salary. And so I recommend that you do not disclose either of these numbers because it can put you at a significant disadvantage later on in your salary negotiation and really limit the amount of money that you could potentially earn by negotiating a higher salary. So how do you answer this question? Let me give you a sample answer that I like to use, and of course you're welcome to modify this any way that you like. But I think a good answer to the first part of the question is something like this. I'm not really comfortable sharing that information. I prefer to focus on the value I can add to this company and not what I'm paid at my current job. So you're saying that you're not comfortable answering this, but then you're immediately turning this into something I mentioned earlier, which is an answer that helps tell the company's story and how you'll improve it if you're a part of that story. So you'd prefer to focus on the value that you can add. So I'd rather not tell you my current salary, but I would like to talk about all the value that I can add to your company. And so you're immediately turning this question around from an opportunity to make a mistake to an opportunity to demonstrate that you're on board, that you want to be a pivotal part of the company and help them to grow or succeed in whatever ways are important to them. And the second part of the dreaded salary question, which is the desired salary part of the question, can be answered with, I want this move to be a big step forward for me in terms of both responsibility and compensation. So there are three different things I'd like to point out here in this answer to the question. And the first one is that you're indicating that you like this step to be a big step forward. And again, this ties into what you mentioned before in the first half of this question, which is, I don't want to talk about what I was making at my current company. I don't want to talk about my current salary. I don't want to talk about my current situation. I want this to be a big step forward. So even if we were talking about all that, it doesn't matter because I want this to be a big step forward for me. Then you indicate how you want this to be a big step forward. First, in terms of responsibility, the additional responsibility that you want to take on. So you have certain responsibilities now. You want to do even more and bring even more to the table for this company, which again demonstrates the value you want to add. And the third part is that you also want this to be a big step forward for you in terms of compensation. So again, you're separating yourself from your current salary and responsibility set. You're indicating that you want to take on more responsibility and add value to the company. And the last part of this answer is that you also want to be compensated for all that additional value that you plan to bring to the company if you come on board. So your takeaway from this section is, don't divulge your salary numbers. It's very important that you keep these numbers to yourself. You might get a little bit of resistance here, but in general, you'll find that if you push back a couple of times and give answers like the one that I suggested for the dreaded salary question, eventually the hiring manager or recruiter that you're talking to will just sort of move on and let it go and get back into the interview process and away from this sneaky salary negotiation question that they've asked you about. So don't divulge your current or desired salary, and you'll be much better off for it when you get to the negotiation process later on. Once you've aced your interview, the company will hopefully make you a strong job offer. So now your goal shifts from get a good offer to maximize your salary before you start the job. So let's walk through an overview of my salary negotiation strategy to give you the basic idea of how I recommend that you negotiate and to give you some specific tactics that you can use in your salary negotiation. Before we jump into the strategy and tactics that I recommend that you use to negotiate a higher starting salary, I want to start here, which is with an encouragement that you should absolutely negotiate your starting salary, because you could be leaving a lot of money on the table if you don't negotiate. The two main reasons people seem to shy away from negotiating their starting salary are, first, that they're afraid to start off on the wrong foot with the recruiter or hiring manager, so they don't want to burn any bridges. If you use my salary negotiation method, it's not abrasive, it's not aggressive necessarily, it's just a simple, numerical back and forth. The second reason is they're afraid that the job offer will get pulled. I've literally never seen a job offer pulled because someone negotiated a salary. I've been responsible for hiring, I don't know how many people, somewhere between 30 and 40 people throughout my career. I've consulted on hiring a lot more people. I've consulted with a lot of people on negotiating their salary. I've never seen anyone have a job offer pulled because they negotiate. So I realize it can seem like that might happen, but the reality is I've never seen it. It's very unlikely that would happen to you. So don't allow that to dissuade you from negotiating. The first thing you need to do before you negotiate is set your minimum acceptable salary. Based on what you know about the company, you need to figure out what your minimum is. In other words, what's your walk-away number? You decide this before you negotiate so that you have it in stone and you can comfortably just walk away from the negotiation if you're not getting to your minimum acceptable salary to do the job at the company. It's important that you do this early so that you're objective when you set the number. I'll give you some things that you can consider when you're setting that salary. So the first thing is your own reference point. So back to your current salary and your desired salary. This is when it comes into play, but this is for you personally to set your minimum acceptable salary. And so you want to use your current salary, your desired salary, maybe the salary you think you'll get if you don't negotiate at all. If you happen to know what people at that company doing the job that you're interviewing for are making, then you can account for that and what your minimum is. I realize that may sound unusual, but a lot of times you're hiring at a company because somebody recommended you, and maybe it's somebody that will be your peer if you hire in. They may have told you what they're making, or they may have said, hypothetically, somebody like me would make this amount, and you know that. So you can account for that with your minimum. You also want to account for, if you have a current job that you're working, raises and bonuses that are pending. Don't forget about those. I've seen a lot of people who will negotiate a new salary, they'll start a new job, and then they'll realize that they're not going to get their 15% bonus payout for last year because they quit before it was paid out. So make sure that you're considering that stuff when you're setting a new salary at a new company, and account for it at your minimum so that you negotiate a number that you'll feel comfortable with if you miss out on a raise or a bonus at your current job. And then the last thing is just your overall feel for the company. So this is really squishy and sort of subjective, but the idea is that you're really excited about some opportunities and you're less excited about other opportunities. So you'll take that number that you had in mind, and if it's a really exciting opportunity, for whatever reason, you might accept a little bit less money in your minimum acceptable salary to work that job because there's more potential there, or you like the people, or maybe there's a shorter commute or something like that. On the flip side, maybe you're not as excited about it, so you want to bump that minimum up a little bit so that you make sure that if you do land that job, that you're at a salary that makes you comfortable there. So set your minimum acceptable salary before you start negotiating. Pick a number and stick to it. It's important that you pick this number before you negotiate and that you don't move it unless you have a really compelling reason to move it. A compelling reason is not, I kind of feel like I want to get this job. It's a compelling reason would be you learn something new that's material that would really affect what you think you should be paid to do the job. So pick your minimum acceptable salary before you start negotiating. And then you're going to counter. Once you get the offer from the company after you've interviewed, you're going to counter between 10 and 20% above their offer. This is a really simplified version of some pretty simple stuff that I do in my method, but the gist of it is that you're going to counter between 10 and 20%. The bottom range at 10% is just not enough to move the needle for virtually any company. If you're offered $50,000 and you counter at $55,000, they're just not going to blink at that. It's just not enough to move the needle. 20% is enough to start making them feel like you're pushing, but you'll only counter 20 if you feel that they need you to do the job pretty badly and that you are comfortable regardless of whether or not you get the job. So the basic idea is you're going to counter between 10 and 20% above their offer. 10 is on the lower end, and 10 is where you need the job and you don't sense that they're particularly anxious to hire you. They're not indicating that they are desperate in any way. Your baseline is 10. Up to 20 is if you feel like they really need you to do the job and you could take it or leave it, you counter at 20. Then you're going to define your negotiation window. So once you've countered, you've now set a new negotiation window. And this, I won't go into too much detail here, but this is the reason that you don't disclose your current or desired salary when you're asked the dreaded salary question, is because you want this negotiation window to be as high as possible. You want them to make you a good offer so you can counter up here. And what you're trying to do is sort of feel around in the dark for the maximum salary that they're willing to pay you. And you really can't figure that out if you've already told them essentially what you want. Because then they're offering you a salary based on what you told them you want, as opposed to based on what they think they need to pay you to do the job, to convince you to come on board. So when you define your negotiation window, it looks something like this. You have your initial offer at the bottom. Again, I said $50,000 earlier, so we'll say $50,000. And then up top, you have your counter, which might be $56,000. So a couple of things I'll point out here is that you can see that I've kind of defined a window here, right? So you've now got a discrete set of salaries between $50,000 and $56,000 that you might wind up at. You're very unlikely to end up below $50,000 because they already offered you $50,000. You're very unlikely to end up above $56,000 because you countered at $56,000, and they would have offered you more than that if they could pay you more than that or would. So you're going to end up between $50,000 and $56,000, and now that's your negotiation window. You'll notice in this example, this counter is 12% above the $50,000 offer. What that implies, given what I said earlier, is you're closer to that 10% floor, which means this is a job I'm pretty excited about, and I haven't seen the company demonstrate that they desperately need me to do the job in any way. So I'm countering closer to that 10% number. So once you have your negotiation window, then you're going to plan for each increment in the window. So I said 50 up to 56, 51, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are your increments. So you want to sit down with a piece of paper and a pen, define your window, and you're going to write down your response when the company comes back to you. So they offered 50, I countered 56, they come back at 55, probably good, right? If they say 56, we're probably good. If they say 52, maybe I ask them to come up to 54. So you're going to plan for all those little increments. There's only 5 of them there. So just take some time and figure out what you want to say. And the reason you do this is just countering will make you more money. It's very likely that the company will pay you more than they initially offered. But taking the extra time to plan for the increments between their offer and your counter can make you a little bit more money at the end if you don't let off the gas pedal. So you're not done negotiating when you counter. You're done negotiating when you agree to a final salary. So think about what you'll do if the company comes back to you at a number less than your counter. Okay, and then for people that want to stay put, I want to talk quickly, as quickly as I've been talking, I guess, about promotions and raises. So what can you do if you're going to stay at your current company? You're not changing companies, so you're not interviewing for new jobs, you're not negotiating a new salary with a new company. What can you do to get a raise or a promotion if you feel like that's something that you should pursue right now? The first thing that you have to do is define your goal. So this is the first mistake I see with people who go for a raise or promotion is they think their goal is get a promotion. That's not a goal, that's like an idea. A goal is, specifically for a raise, is a target salary. So your goal is not get more money, your goal is get X dollars. And that target salary should be based on market research. I'll tell you at the end of the course, I have a free 15-minute video course that you can take called How to Estimate Your Market Value. It's really simple stuff. Think back to when I said preparation for the interview phase. It's like that simple. Take 15 or 20 minutes and you go through and you estimate the market value for your skill set and experience in your industry. And once you have that number, then you can use that to figure out where you think you should be paid at your current company. So when you're getting a raise, you need to set a target salary. You have to have a goal that you have in mind. And that's what you should eventually present to your manager. So you don't go to your manager and say, I want a raise. You say, I want a raise too, because. For a promotion, your goal is your target job. Usually it's the next job up in your career path. So if you're a junior developer, it might be developer is your next one. If you're a developer, it might be senior developer. Or it could be what I call an over and up promotion, which might be a promotion to a higher job and a higher pay grade somewhere else in the company. So maybe you've been working in development, you want to move over to graphic design. and you've got experience in both because you've been doing a lot of front-end stuff. And so you might be promoted to a different career path. But either way, you want to set your target job and understand what that target job entails. So again, get a promotion is not a tangible goal. It's not achievable. You can't measure it. Get a promotion to a target job. Get a promotion to senior developer. That's a tangible goal where you can start putting some metrics around it and figuring out what your roadmap is to get there. To do that, you need a compelling case. So let me talk through a compelling case for a raise, and I'll talk through for a promotion. So asking for your raise or promotion is important. Articulating what your specific goal is important. And then you need to justify what you're asking for with a case. For a raise, the way that you articulate what your case is for the amount that you've asked for is first that market research that you did. So you can say, it looks like in this industry, my skill set and experience seem to be worth about this much. But more importantly, what you're really saying when you ask for a raise at your company is that your current salary was set sometime in the past, and it doesn't reflect the current value that you add to the company. And you'd like to adjust your salary now from that past setting point to reflect the additional value that you add to the company. So in other words, you're talking about what's changed since that salary was set. So that might be you've taken on more responsibility, you've learned new technology, you've gotten a new certification of some kind. Whatever that is that's changed since your salary was set until now, that's your case for why you should be paid more money. Not because you need to pay your mortgage or you got a new car. These are not compelling reasons for a company to pay you more money because they're in the business of making money, not helping you make car payments, right? And so what you want to demonstrate is that we set my salary 2 years ago. Since then, I've done these things, I've learned these things, I've taken on these responsibilities. Therefore, I'm more valuable to the company. My market value estimate for what I'm doing is about this, and so I would like a raise to this. That's a compelling case for a manager. And that gives them something they can sink their teeth into when they're talking about it with other managers and with finance and everybody else. For a promotion, this is a little bit easier actually, because you know what your target job is, and usually on the company site or ask your manager, you can find the job description for your target job. And so you take your current job, and you look at your target job, and you figure out what the differences are, what are the things you're not doing right now that target job requires, and you do them. I don't want to trivialize it, but it's really not hard. The trick is to understand that companies rarely promote based on potential. They don't look at people and say, man, that guy could be like a super developer one day, so we're just going to bump up to senior developer, and we hope we're right. What they do is they look at somebody who's doing senior developer level work, and they promote them to be a senior developer. So your job is to demonstrate that you can do senior developer level work to justify a raise or a promotion to senior developer. So that's why I say show your work here, is that from where the manager is sitting, they're promoting people because they've demonstrated that they're already doing a job that is higher than the one that they're currently in. And so when you go to your manager, you say, hey, I looked at the next job up in my career path. Here's the job description. Here are the things that it says that are required that are not required of my current job. Here's evidence that I've done all those things, and I'd like to talk to you about getting promoted. When can we make that happen? Then you prepare your case. Basically, this entails a couple of things. Oops, sorry about that. So when you prepare your case, there are two things that you really need to include your case, in addition to whatever your goal was. So your case is for a raise or a promotion, a raise to a number or a promotion to a job. You want to list accomplishments. So in other words, for a raise, these are the things that you've done, the accomplishments that you have that demonstrate that you add more value to the company. For a promotion, usually your accomplishments are the things that you've done to demonstrate that you're doing the job you're targeting. So these are the new responsibilities that you've taken on. If you're mentoring somebody or you're preparing some kind of a quarterly report for your manager, again, you're doing twice as many projects or whatever it is, it's your accomplishments in general. So what's the stuff that you're doing that justifies the request that you made for a raise or a promotion? And the second thing is accolades. In the marketing world, you might call this social proof, right? So if you've got emails from people saying that you're a superstar, save them. Keep a folder in your inbox called superstar, or whatever you want to call it. When somebody says, hey, Josh did a super job on this project, he saved us $15,000 because he made this change and we didn't have to bring on this contractor, keep that. And you're going to put that in along with whatever you're doing. For both accomplishments and accolades, if you're looking at a raise as your goal, then try to find a quantitative component. So in other words, you're asking for more money, so your accomplishments and accolades will hopefully show that you're adding more value in dollars to the company to justify the money that you're asking for. For a promotion, they're more qualitative. So you're doing more things, you've taken on more responsibility, you're helping out with this part of the company, you're stretching over into this other role. So those are my rules of thumb: is quantitative for raises because you're asking for money, qualitative for promotions because you're asking for more responsibility. Then you're going to make a request. You'll do this in 2 phases. So as you prepared your case, you recorded your goal, your accomplishments, and your accolades. So you've got all this more or less written down. The first thing you want to do is reach out to your manager and schedule a one-on-one to put in your request. Now, this request, hopefully, in your mind, if you're hearing the request that you might make to your manager, it sounds a little bit different than before today. You're thinking about demonstrating the value along with your request, and you're asking for a very specific, tangible goal as opposed to a vague goal of just a raise or a promotion. You want to make your request first verbally to your manager in a one-on-one. Hopefully you have regular one-on-ones with your manager. If you don't, just reach out to them and say, hey, if I can get 15 or 20 minutes of your time, I'd like to talk to you. And then you just verbally ask them for whatever you're after. Here's my target. Here's my target salary or my target job. Here's my case. Can we make this happen? After you have that meeting, your manager will almost certainly need to go talk to other people in the company to figure out what they can do. That's usually what they'll say is, let's see what we can do. Then you'll follow up with an email with your same request in writing. And the reason you're doing that is not for like HR documentation. It's because there's a good chance that your manager is going to need to go to somebody else to ask for more money for you or see if there's an open position for you. And he or she is going to need to make their case that you're ready for this thing. You've taken a lot of time to prepare your case, and so you would rather your case be in your writing, in your words, circulated in the company as opposed to playing telephone with your manager, summarizing your words and passing along the parts they remember. So first you schedule a one-on-one and verbally request, then you follow up with it in writing afterwards to make sure that your words are the ones that are communicating the request. Okay, really quickly before we get into questions, I want to tell you about some of the stuff that I offer, specifically video courses that I've been launching over the past month or so. Anybody here like to look at Product Hunt, spend time on Product Hunt? All right, so you might have seen my video courses on Product Hunt. Maybe not, but they're there. So I've got 5 video courses that you can take a look at, and it might be helpful for you if there was a part of this that you thought, oh, that's for me, but we couldn't get deep enough because of the time constraint. Then the video courses might be something you'd be interested in. There's a How to Ace Your Next Interview course. It's about 50 minutes long. It'll walk you through the interview process. It dives a lot deeper into most of what I said, including a framework for how to answer interview questions, some sample questions that you can look out for and practice with, and that kind of thing. There's how to negotiate your starting salary. So again, if you're changing jobs, if you're pursuing a higher salary, it's a much deeper dive into my salary negotiation method. What you saw, everything else is pretty simple, just like that. It's just there are more steps that you can go through to get a little bit more fine-tuned for your specific situation so that your counteroffer, for example, is tuned to your actual situation as opposed to 10 to 20%. And then there's also more on how to do that last part where you have your negotiating window, how to maximize your salary there. And then there's a course on how to get your next raise or promotion. So if you want to stay put, then that course is, I'm launching it on Tuesday. It's going to be about an hour, I think. We'll see. But it's about an hour on how to get your next raise or promotion. And that last part of what I just talked about is in there, again, a lot deeper with examples, an email template, templates you can use to build your written case and all that good stuff. Then there are 2 free courses that I definitely recommend that you look at if you're not interested in the other courses. One is how to estimate your market value. It's a free course. It's 15 minutes. I encourage everybody in here to take that course because 15, 20 minutes later, you'll walk through it and you'll have a tangible sense of what your market value is for your skill set and experience in your industry here in Orlando. And so that's kind of the key is you take a lot of different, really easy to find data points, do a little bit of hand waving, there's a little bit of hand waving, and come up with a number and you say, this is what I think my skill set is worth here. Just having that information can be really valuable because it will signal to you whether you need to do other things than what you're doing now. You may find that you're paid appropriately and that's good on you. That's perfect. So now you can just go back to working hard and trying to acquire new skills, pursuing whatever your next move is. But you may find that your salary is misaligned with the value that you add to the company, and that gives you some things that you can think about doing, like asking for a raise or promotion. The second one is how companies manage their salary structures. So there's some stuff behind all of my salary negotiation and interview and raise and promotion method that is really based on things that I learned in my industry. Over 10 years, I consulted with companies on how they manage compensation, how they budget their money, promotions and raises, pay grades, salary structures, all that stuff. It sort of underlies everything I say, but the salary structures course is a pretty quick, 15-minute overview of how companies actually figure out what you're going to get paid and decide when you should get a raise or a promotion and what that means in terms of the way that their structures are set up to handle employee compensation. Okay, so you can find those at bit.ly/ODevsWorkshop. You can use the coupon code ODEVS for 25% off until March 18th when everything will be launched. So you got about 10 days there. I encourage you to check them out. My email's at the top of the deck, so reach out to me if you have questions about them, about the paid or the free courses. I'm happy to answer questions about any of it. So, with that, do you have any questions?
This is specifically on new position.
Uh-huh.
How do you factor in, one, things like equity, and then also some places may or may not offer relocation, may or may not. You can negotiate with time off and insurance and visa premiums and all that other stuff. How do you, in your negotiation, do you put actual dollar number amounts to those so you can debate them? How do you look at that?
It's a great question, so I'll repeat it for the recording. So the question was, how do you account for things like equity and other non-base salary benefits that you can negotiate for? And specifically, do you put a dollar amount on those when you're negotiating, or how do you account for them? So that's a good question. I didn't get to it here, but I address it specifically in that last part where you have your negotiation window and you're trying to hammer out your final base salary. So taking a step back, my philosophy is that you should focus on base salary above all else. Maximize your base salary, do everything you can to maximize that, and then work in the other benefits if there's room to work them in. I will say that I'm not an expert on, for example, equity in startups, but my opinion on equity in startups, based on my own experience, having worked for a startup that was acquired and then acquired again, is that, I don't know how to say it really diplomatically, I put zero value on equity, unless it's founder equity. If I'm starting the company, I care very much about equity. If I'm hiring into the company as employee 50 or 100, and they're offering me, RSUs and that kind of stuff, I think it has zero value. And in fact, sometimes it can have negative value. If you're forced to exercise options at certain times and you have to pay taxes, that can really sting. And so I think it comes out in the wash, and I just say zero value on equity. That's me personally, and I think that you should do your own research on that. I'm not an expert in that area, equity in particular. For the other items, I do not assign specific dollar values. I assign priorities to them in terms of personal importance. So again, first, negotiate base salary. For me, you maximize your base salary first, and the reason is that's the gift that keeps on giving. You get that every year, and then you can use it to level up. If you get a raise, your base salary is part of that, and you get a raise based on that base salary. So you focus on base salary above all else. And then once you've locked in your base salary, so if you're negotiating, and let's say my example was 50 was your offer and 56 was your counter, they come back at 53. And you say, well, can you do 55? And they say, we'll come up to 54. Well, then you say, okay, fine, 54. Can I get an extra week of vacation in 54 and I'm good, right? Because they didn't move you up to your last request. So as long as they're not coming up to your last base salary request, that implies that you probably have maxed out base salary. Then you start tacking on the things in order of importance that they matter to you. So I just recently helped a friend through a salary negotiation. Going to work for Amazon, and he got a really good offer, and then countered and got more money, and then he essentially stopped pushing on base salary because he was very interested in an extra week of paid vacation. If I remember correctly, Amazon doesn't negotiate on paid vacation, so he went to the next thing on his list. But there were other things that were important to him. Those don't come into play until base salary is locked up, is the short answer to your question. And I don't put dollar values on them because I think that once you get out of base salary, the dollar value stuff kind of falls away and it becomes a personal preference. Do you want another week of vacation with your family every year? Or do you want a shorter commute, so you prefer to work from home 2 days a week if possible? Or do you lease an office and you want that to be paid for? But it's just personal preference. I saw Arun first, yeah.
If you're relocating from a different location, for example, someone, a developer, software developer is moving from Orlando to, say, Bay Area, their base salary is, they're making 70 grand here. The equivalent salary over there might be like 100 grand.
Right.
So during that case, how do you negotiate that? You go 100 grand plus 10% on top of how we want it, or 20% on how we want it.
I'm going to repeat it again. So the question was, how do you account for the cost of living difference? The example was if you're in Orlando and you get a job in the Bay Area where salaries are double, how do you account for that in the salary negotiation? So if you're at 70 here, how do you make sure that you get an equivalent salary there plus your bump for experience? This is one thing that I worked really hard with on my method, and as soon as I say it, you'll say, oh. The answer is that you set your minimum acceptable salary to accommodate the cost of living increase. And so, again, you're not taking the job unless you get your absolute minimum. The rest of it is through negotiation is gravy. And so what you'll do is your research, figure out what your market value estimate is for the Bay Area in that region, figure out what your value is there, and then you'll set your minimum acceptable salary according to what you should be paid to do the job there. So it really doesn't have a lot to do with what you're making now. It has to do with what should you be paid to do that job in that specific area, in that industry in the Bay Area. And so your minimum acceptable salary will do that for you. So what you'll find is, maybe my value in the Bay Area is 120K, and so my minimum acceptable salary is 120K, and now it's built into your negotiation. You're not taking the job unless you get 120.
Salary.com or like other websites that you might just to do like a salary comparison. If I'm a project manager here, equal project manager I've seen like salary.com. Those are the common websites that use. Is that like any of the tools, any of the websites that you can go to refer to?
Now I'm smiling because you hit two of the three that I recommend. The third one is pay scale. So the follow-on to that question was, where do you find that information? So in the How to Estimate Your Market Value video course that I said earlier, the free one, I recommend Glassdoor, salary.com, and payscale.com. I like all of them and dislike all of them for different reasons, but the three together will give you a pretty good idea. And I think all three of them have the ability for you to essentially put in a zip code and get salaries in a region. And you should do that so you normalize to that region. So yeah, you just use internet data. It's all out there, right? It's anonymized usually, but you can get it. So you figure out what is the appropriate salary for my skill set and experience in the industry in that region, and then you set your minimum acceptable salary accordingly, and that's off to the races with the negotiation. And again, you're not telling them what your current salary is, so they don't know. They can probably impute it based on the fact that you live in Orlando, but you're still not telling them that. You're not telling them your desired salary because you want them to communicate to you what they're paying people to do that job in the Bay Area. And then you can negotiate based on that, knowing that your baseline in the sand is minimum acceptable salary, which you set knowing the cost of living and everything else. So this is the minimum I'll accept to do this job in this region. And then if you don't get that number, you just don't take the job. And now you're not stuck in a job in the Bay Area making less than you need to live.
You said about the 10% to 20% after what you're going to offer. Usually what happens to me, when I submit an offer, they already give me a range, like 35 to 40 an hour. So you still have more room after, they give you a range already. So they usually say, hey, this is our range, we cannot change that. So you still negotiate after that when you have a range?
I probably would. I mean, if they told me, so the question was, what do you do when they give you a range up front? I think that you should still negotiate. And the reason is that you don't know, what they told you was they would pay you 35 to 40. What you don't know is if that's what they're willing to pay. And so when you counter, so you'll counter, they said 40, so what I heard was 40. If they say 35 to 40, what I hear is 40. Because you're obviously not going to say, yeah, 35, right? You're just going to so the number is 40 now, and then you're going to counter at 40 plus 10 to 20%, right? And they might come back and say, no, we told you it's 35 to 40, and now you have your answer. You know that they are at the top of their range, which is good information. Then you compare that to your minimum salary and decide whether or not it's good for you.
Sorry, could you flip back to the slide about the being asked and dreaded salary question? So I'm not quite sure I agree with that. I'm not sure it's quite right, because if I'm an employer, I'm asking you that question, what salary do you want? And then if you return to me, I'm not really comfortable sharing that information as an employer, I would say, well, that's a bit of a slap in the face. You're not asking, giving me an answer that is what I'm asking for. So surely the thing to do is actually ask, maybe give the employer a little bit more, be a little bit more honest, maybe give them a salary range, and that gets you out of the doghouse. Because if I said, I'm not really comfortable sharing the information, I'll be saying, it's like, well, you've got something to hide, I'll exclude you from the interview process.
Okay.
It has to be a better answer than that, surely.
Good. So the question was basically, is this a good answer to the dreaded salary question? What if it puts the company off, and since you're withholding information and not really playing ball with them, what if they decide that they're just not going to move forward with you because you're not playing nice?
Because it excludes you from the whole negotiation process.
So
you're at first interview, and you say, I'm not comfortable sharing information. I was like, well, okay, see you later.
Right. So I'm actually surprised it took us this long for you to ask that question. So it's usually like the first one. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good question. I think it's a legitimate concern, and what I can tell you is that in my experience, the fact is that they're not going to stop talking to you because you don't disclose.
Yeah, you have to be that good a developer for them to be. And if developers are dime a dozen out there, why would you?
We're developers are dime a dozen.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do agree that developers are a dime a dozen. I think they're in demand right now.
Even in demand, you know.
Right. I think, so you mentioned maybe mentioning a range. You could do that. I think if you feel like you must talk numbers with them, then a good response is not to give a range of yourself, but to say, it sounds like you're trying to qualify me for a range. Why don't you tell me what the range is, and I'll tell you if I'm in there.
But if you really wanted that job, though, you wouldn't not answer the question.
I think you would. Something I didn't really have time to get to in the presentation, I actually pulled it yesterday, is what I call leveling the playing field, which is the reason that I strongly discourage you from sharing this information from the dreaded salary question is that if you think about the universe of information that's available to people regarding salaries at this company. The company has 99% of that information. They know how many people are currently doing the job that you're trying to fill. They know what they're paying those people. They know what people in the past have made when they've gone to other companies. They know how desperately they need to fill the position. They know all of this stuff. All you know is what your current salary is and your desired salaries. That's it. You really don't know anything about what's going on inside the company. So you've got two little bitty pieces of information, and they're asking you to disclose them. And so in that sense, I don't see it as a combative relationship, but I do see it as, I've only got two pieces of information. I'm going to hold on to them because they're all I have. Everything else is what the company has. So the only pushback that I've gotten on this is from recruiters, and their answer is well, why don't we just everybody just play nice so we can just close the deal? But it's just not to your advantage, and I understand the concern that they might say, I'm not going to play ball with you because you're not disclosing this information, but that just doesn't happen. Usually it's like a checkbox that the recruiter has on their list of stuff they're trying to do, and like one of the checkboxes is ask them for their current salary and desired salary. And if you don't give it to them, they're eventually just going to say, okay, well, I'll get back to you on that. And then they'll just keep going with the interview. So I think that your concern is legitimate, but in my experience, that's not how it plays out.
I still strongly disagree because the whole point of an interview is that you're there to answer their questions and vice versa. If you're not providing tangible information, then there's too much more to tell.
But this isn't part of the interview. This is part of the negotiation, right? And so, I mean, we're kind of veering into like this sort of like it's almost like an ethical.
It's the $64,000 question, isn't it?
For them,
how much you get.
It could cost you $64,000, and it could make them $64,000, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why what you're describing is exactly why I call it the dreaded salary question, is because it appears to be an interview question that's a gatekeeper for you to continue in the interview process. In reality, it's a sneaky negotiation question. They pop up to the top early in the process, and I don't want to imply at all that companies are disingenuous.
The point is that the employer has the authority. They put the ad out to employ you.
Right, but what I'm saying is they're.
So you can have to put yourself in. There has to be a better answer than that.
Let's say you're going out to buy a car. Right? You're not going to tell the guy how much money you got in the bank.
No, but you give them a.
You want the advantage to negotiate for the car.
No, but you give them a range. You give them an idea.
I actually wouldn't.
I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that until I was ready to close the deal.
So, for example, you've already done your research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you know your minimum salary is going to be $50,000, right? So you give them a range. So you just say, well, minimum $50,000. It would be right there at the start.
Right.
And then you agree with the research bit, and then you begin to qualify it upwards. I I don't think.
But what if they were willing to pay 70,000 and they didn't even get to that point?
Right.
And you're like, oh, 50, and you're like, just say 20K.
Right.
You don't know at the end
Well,
of the
you
day.
give them a range 50,000 to 100,000.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, they care about their bottom line, so you should care
Yeah,
about
but
your
they're the ones
bottom
offering the job, not
line.
you.
It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you know, you got the
It's
kind
still
of.
a principle, right? Like you can ask the question, typically the HR people call you and ask you what's the salary range.
And then
You
you
can,
budget.
no, you can ask them, you know more about this question, tell us what your salary band is. And I will respond like if I fit in it.
Right.
If they come back and say, for this question, you're 60 to 80,000, and it's like, then you can decide.
So the answer is then, what is your budget? Rather than what comfortable training.
Or I think I like this answer better, but you could do that too.
I will go.
Or I mean, it depends. It really kind of depends on like how sort of aggressive you want to be. Another good answer is, are you making me an offer?
Being clear.
Right.
To,
That's I've seen people use that to success and just say, "Are you making me an offer?" Like instead of, "Why? If we're talking numbers, just make me an offer and I'll tell you what I think."
so you counter the question with another question.
Yeah, you could do that. I like this better because it's a little bit less combative and because it still allows you to demonstrate that you want to be a team player, but you're just not going to disclose that information. I saw a hand over here. Yeah.
In this scenario, you're more so in the beginning of the interview or in the middle of the interview, like you said,
Yes.
and not in the negotiating process.
I call it the pre-interview. So you're not interviewing, you're talking to a recruiter who's qualifying you and trying to figure out how to move forward, usually.
So what if you're at the end of the negotiating process and they ask you point blank, what do you need to join our team?
I don't know. I'm just not sure what the appropriate number is. I'm not familiar with your business operations and how you run your company. I'm not comfortable guessing, and that's what I would be doing. I'd rather hear what you think is appropriate.
Sure, it's based on your research.
Right, but I'm saying like for the company, basically what you're saying is to the company, you're saying you're in a better position than I am to answer that question. So tell me what you think. That's the short answer.
So essentially what you're saying is the first person who says something in the deal loses out in a way. Because if
Almost
you
always.
tell yourself, you tell your company, I want to make 60,000,
You just
you
capped at
already
60.
limited
That's right.
yourself by telling them what you wanted to make.
Yep.
When if you sort of combat it or avoid it or ask them how much they would pay you, you're trying to get a gauge for what they're interested in paying you. Is that
Yeah.
what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, like in your example. So if you told them 60,000, you've probably put a ceiling on how much you can make. The only reason that you wouldn't get 60,000 is that you're lucky and unlucky that it turns out that the pay grade that you're pursuing a job in is the bottom of that pay grade is higher than 60,000. That's the only reason you're going to get more than 60,000 because they'd be crazy to pay you more than 60,000, right? And so you don't tell them because, like I said, you're sort of feeling around the dark. You're trying to figure out like what is the number they're willing to pay. And sort of back to his point earlier, he mentioned that you're trying to get a job, but they're also trying to get skills. And so it's an exchange, right? This is not they're not just helicopter dropping money on you. They're saying we need to fill a position, and you have skills, and so let's come together with a number. And what you're saying to them is you have more information than I do, so I'm going to let you name the number, and I will respond to it. And if you stick to their guns, this will work well. I can't put a number on it, but a lot, very frequently. Almost never will it fail.
What happens to the tactic that, let's say you want 60K and your price range is around 60K, but you ask for like 80 and have them talk you down?
You could do that. So the one time, I generally don't say this because people might use it more than they should, but the one time that I think that you should actually name the first number is if you're afraid they would offer a number that's so low that you can't even negotiate it. And so you're trying to start the negotiation off in a place that gets you to where you could actually land in your range. So that's I think that's sort of your question. Your question was, why not just name a high number so that you can negotiate down to what you want? You could do that, but you're still naming the first number. And what if they were willing to pay 100? You don't know. And that's kind of the whole point of what I'm saying is you don't, back to the universe of information, they know what they're willing to pay. They might be willing to pay 100. And you might think you're blowing them out of the water at 80. And then they come back and they say 80, okay. And you're like, oh man, I just left however much money on the table. You don't know. And so you can't know until they make you an offer. And so when they give you that first number, they're revealing information to you about what they're willing to pay that position that you did not previously have. And so I'm avoiding like game theory stuff here. I also have written a poker book. I used to play poker, so I'm thinking in terms of game theory and payoffs and all that stuff, right? But the bottom line is that there's information that you don't have, and you're waiting for them to disclose that information to you to reveal their negotiating position and the range that they're willing to pay. And you could guess at it, but you're just guessing, right? You may even think you're making an informed guess, but you're still guessing, and that can cost you money. There's a lot of.
Yeah, just one more point.
Uh-huh.
One point there. If you say that I'm not comfortable sharing that information, and then they've advertised in the job ad salary range, and it shows that you haven't actually read the job description in the first place. In those cases, if it's in a case where you negotiate, I think somewhat upwards of 100k, then fair enough.
So the question was, what if the salary range is in the job description, and you give this answer, and that implies that you did not read the job description? First of all, you should have read the job description in your basic preparation for the job. So you should read the job description. And second of all, I think that if it's in the job description, which is pretty rare, it does happen, but it's pretty rare. But if it's in there, then the assumption is that you're interviewing for the job knowing what the range is, and probably hoping that you're going to get higher than the range, right? And so I would take that as almost a personal challenge. If there's a range in the job description, I wouldn't interview for it unless I was comfortable landing somewhere in that range. However, I would go through the entire interview process with the goal of getting them to make me an offer above that range. Basically showing them I'm such a superstar, they're going to break the bank to bring me on.
They lowball those ranges a lot, and they ask for
Yeah.
100,000 skills that not one person.
Right.
But then you say, well, the minimum range has to be the job description plus all skills and things like that.
Right.
You just go there and answer the question.
So again, you can. The comment was that, and a lot of times there's like just a blanket list of skills and stuff, and they're lowballing the range. So again, what you can do is you can demonstrate what your skill set and experience is, and let them tell you what that's worth to them. And so that's why this method, I think, is so strong, is that you're cutting through all that garbage, and you're showing them, look, I see what's in the job description, I see the range. Here's what I'm bringing to the table. What are you paying for that skill set and experience in your industry right now? And they'll give you a number. And a lot of times I think it's different than what it says in the job description. I saw back here first.
So currently I work part-time as a contractor at a company while I'm going back to school part-time. And my director and my VP have told me that they're interested in hiring me when I graduate in a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
So
Good,
are
congrats.
What?
Congrats.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So now, does that change any of these salary negotiating tips? Because they already know what I make as an hourly wage because I'm contracting to them.
So I think you end up, that's an interesting question. So the question was, if you're working as a contractor part-time now, going to school, and you anticipate that the company is going to make you a full-time offer once you graduate, is that a salary negotiation that can leverage this technique? I think it falls in an interesting sort of space between the salary negotiation for changing jobs and the raise discussion that I had earlier. And so what I would encourage you to do is, they do know what you're making right now, but you now have acquired additional leverage, which is a degree. And so if they don't have very much incentive to lowball you. They have a lot of incentive to offer you a fair wage. And so what you should do is understand what that fair wage is before they make you an offer by doing the research to understand what your market value is. And so assume that you were going somewhere else. What's the appropriate pay for you? And then you would set your minimum acceptable salary. And then when they make you the offer, you can decide how to respond to the offer. So I don't think that you would go to them and pitch a number. Yes, they know what you're making right now, but things are changing. So again, back to the raise conversation, what's changed since my last salary was set? Well, I got a degree, right? And so I think it's kind of a merge of the two, but it looks more like a salary negotiation. You're going to do research, understand the market value for your skill set and experience in your industry, set your minimum acceptable salary. When they make you the offer, then I think you can counter or not counter. That's a little different because you're working with a company. I personally still think that you should counter. But it's sort of a personal preference. But you need to set your minimum acceptable salary so that you know, here's what I think I'm worth now that I have this degree, and that you're not allowing yourself to sort of use inertia as a reason to take less than you'd be comfortable with to do that job.
Since you're already in the company, you're a developer, for example, there is a band, which band like this or the experience of which band you might follow. So every company has a band structure, so if you're bigger, you have for A, B, C, so they have a salary range. So since you're Right.
It's gonna be huge.
So those might factor into it, so that might give you a better understanding of like how much people want to be a low more than you are giving you a fair rate. So that's part of the research that you might have.
And I think you would account for a lot of those, like insurance coverage, for example, is something you would account for in your minimum acceptable salary, right? Like that's one of those kind of those markers that you might use to say, you know what, I'll take a little bit less salary than I think like the range is because I'm going to be getting benefits. So not that you're taking less than your market value, but you understand that there's a difference between where I'm at now in terms of how much money I'm out of pocket on insurance versus how much I'll be out of pocket on insurance once I have full benefits of a full-time job, right? And so that would be part of your minimum acceptable salary because it's literally dollars in your pocket, right? Bruno?
Especially like as front-end developer, we always have like new frameworks coming. And one thing that I see is, I mean, like my company, like, for example, I work with Backbone. And I want to work with Angular or React or whatever, so I'm applying for new jobs. They usually ask for, okay, I want a guy with 1 year experience with Angular. I played with Angular, but I'm not a Jedi Angular, you know. So how do you handle like on a resume? You say you know the language, you put like a level, or you say to the company, hey, I'm applying here because I want to work with those technologies, and how does that affect setup? Because okay, I'm hiring you, but you are not an expert on this, so I'm giving you an opportunity to be, I will pay less. So how
Sure.
does it work?
I mean, I think you first of all, your answer was pretty good already. I think what you said there at the end, I think captured a lot of it. But so the question for the recording was, if you're looking for a job at a different company, you've been acquiring, or maybe at your same company, but you're putting new things on your resume by learning new technologies like Angular or Ember, other front-end frameworks. And so you're going to, you've learned Angular, or maybe you have the level that you would get from like a boot camp, right? Like Iron Yard. Like you have a certain level of experience, but you're certainly not like 5 years or 2 years experience in the industry. So I think that it should be on your resume. This isn't something I mentioned today, but my general rule of thumb is if it's on your resume, you should be able to talk to it. So first of all, it's only on your resume because you actually would do a job with it and can answer questions about it. I think it's fine to put, I'm not sure exactly what the jargon would be, but whatever indicates that like beginner seems like a word that I wouldn't want to put on my resume, but Angular intermediate or lower intermediate or something to indicate to them that you're lower intermediate. And that would impact, what you're getting paid. I mean, the bottom line is if they're paying you to be an Angular developer and you're a novice, you just started using Angular, they shouldn't be paying you top dollar in the industry. And so I think that as long as you just close that on your resume and just make sure that they know that you're getting into it, I think that's a case where maybe having something to show them would help, right? So I think putting something in front of them that demonstrates your proficiency with Angular is better than just putting a word on a resume. You can say, yeah, I just learned Angular and started using it a year ago, and here's something I built, right? I think is really helpful. So they can actually see what it is, and they can then determine, are you qualified to do the job? And then they can make you an offer in range that reflects your qualification to do the job.
Yeah, because usually what happens to me, like I have my skills that I've been working like for more than 5 years, and I receive good offers from those skills that I already have. But I'm looking forward to learning new technologies that I'm learning on my pet projects, when not in production.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to say no to a job that's offering you more money for those things that you already know.
Right.
Because you want to learn new technology, and a guy see that you are not expert on this, so he offers less money.
Right.
So you need to refuse a job that offers more money for things that you already know, but because you want to work with new technologies, and since you are not an expert, they are offering less money.
I think too. I mean, if you really want to work with that technology, start shipping stuff in that technology, right? So you mentioned like maybe you haven't put stuff in production, you're just working on side projects. Find a way to put some stuff into production, right? Ship it. So that's the first thing that I would say is if you really want to work with that technology, just start putting it out there. Software development is it's a beautiful thing because you can teach yourself and also actually put things out into the world that are real products, right? Like, if you wanted to like make a car prototype, you probably can't do that unless you're Elon Musk, right? But like, if you want to build software, you just start building software and you ship it, and maybe it's terrible, and then you ship it again, something else, and it's better, and you ship some things, and then you show, so you can build your own proficiency there.
Yeah, but it's a bad idea. Let's say I'm a front-end developer, but I will apply for a company that uses Ruby on Rails as backend. Okay, so they put on the job description. Oh, it's a plus if you know a little bit of Rails.
Right.
It's a bad idea to put it on your. So you take a course, like 1 week course. You have the base, and you put this in your resume, like saying, hey, I have an idea how rails work when I'm front-end developer.
Sure.
It's a good idea to, because since you know all the stack that I'm using, it's a good idea to have like a specific resume for that company because you're applying for them.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a different question that I think is a good one, which is the question was, should you have specific resumes for different companies for the technologies they use, for the stacks they use? And I think yes. Again, if you kind of back to my comment earlier about if it's on your resume, you should be able to talk to it. I think it's fine to build. I can't remember who it was. I said I think you need to have 3 different resumes because she was applying to 3 different kinds of jobs, and she wasn't doing software development, but she was applying to like a director of ops job and then like a VP of marketing job or something, and she was trying to do it all with one resume, and she wasn't getting callbacks, she wasn't getting interviews. And I said, that's because your resume has too much stuff in it that doesn't matter to them. So if you're applying to a company that's on a certain stack, I think you have to weigh that. I think there are benefits to showing that you're proficient in the stack that they use, but also that you have experience with other stacks. But I think you want to focus on the stuff that they care about. And I think it says a lot to a company.
Even if you don't have experience with the stack. Like,
you should
have some of them, but not all of them.
You should, emphasize the parts of the stack that you do have experience with. And that's something you can talk about in the interview. I think most of the time, some companies require you to jump in and you're like full stack. Most companies, you can spend some time working on the part that you're proficient with while you pick up the other parts. And that's so I would list everything that you're good at and then mention the stuff that you're becoming better at, improving at on your resume. And it's okay. I think it's good to have different resumes certainly for different types of jobs, but even for different companies. If you're going to a Microsoft shop, at least put that stuff up top. I just realized we're not. Where are we on time? 8. Okay.
People have more questions?
Yep. I just want to make sure we weren't looking. I didn't know what time it was. 9 o'clock. Go ahead.
How do you handle a scenario where you're at an existing job and you're offered a promotion along with a compensation package and you weren't expecting, you didn't do research, you didn't analyze how much value actually you're bringing? Do you still try to negotiate that? And how do you go about that?
Sure. So the question was, what do you do if you are offered a promotion package with a compensation change and you weren't ready for it? Do you do research? Do you negotiate it? That's a good question. I think the first thing that you do is you say, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting this. Can I have some time to think about it? Which is something you should do pretty much in any negotiation. Anytime they offered you something, take some time to think about it so you can do research. And so if that happened to me, first of all, that's like pretty cool. So nice work. But then the second thing I would do is say, I need some time to think about it. I would immediately scurry off and estimate my market value and figure out, like, is this a good offer, right? I think you might negotiate or not. That's an interesting situation because you didn't request it. And so I think the first thing that I would want to know so that I would do research on is sort of like, what does this mean at this company? If the company is really flush with cash and they're growing rapidly and they're bringing a bunch of people in and what they're doing is giving you a market adjustment to try and keep you from leaving, then you probably do want to negotiate because that tells me that they're just trying to keep their good people around, which is good for you, and you could take it as an opportunity to negotiate. I wouldn't necessarily do that though, and certainly if it's more like they're just finally recognizing you with a merit increase. What you might do is accept what they offer you, do your market research so you know what your value is, and then set your target for your next raise at another number, and tell your manager, thanks for this. It's funny that you bring this up because I've been looking at my market value and saw that I was pretty far under at my pay here. So I'm really glad to see this. It doesn't get me quite to where I thought that I should be, but I'd like, we can talk about that later, basically. And then you can go back for like phase 2. So when I had people working for me, I did this a couple of times with people where we would, essentially HR would suddenly realize that they were drastically underpaying somebody, like way below market. And so they would say, well, we can't give them this much of a jump right at one time. We just can't do it. So let's go half now and half in 6 months. So that's something you could talk to your manager about. So I think the first thing to do is just kind of figure out why did they do it? What's the company situation? There's a lot of sort of like intangible things you'd want to account for. I think in general you want to be grateful for something like that if they offer it to you, but also kind of ask yourself why they're doing that. They could be trying to be cagey and give you what looks like an okay offer, but maybe not what they thought you were about to ask for or something like that, right? In which case they're kind of like preemptively fighting off a negotiation. There's a lot. That's frankly, it's something that I would want to talk to you for a while about and ask you a lot of questions about your company and see what's the situation. Are other people getting these kind of things? Is it just you? How long have you been there? But my gut tells me be thankful for it, do your market value, figure out what you should be paid, and if it's still quite a bit more, don't waste too much time starting to pursue that next target of your race.
In your answer that you just gave, you mentioned that you gave the example of someone who was being paid far under market value, and HR realized that the person was justifully paid, and wasn't able to necessarily essentially raise the salary all in one jump. It's simply too big. What are some common reasons for that?
Budgeting. The biggest. So the question was, my example was of somebody who HR discovered that they were paying someone far below market, realized they needed to adjust market, but then also realized they couldn't make the full adjustment at one time, so they broke it into 2 adjustments 6 months apart. The reason is budgeting. That's a rabbit hole that you can just fall right down because it's basically different for every company. But the bottom line is at any given moment in a company, there's probably some bucket of money that's available for stuff like that. And if this person needs that kind of adjustment, the entire bucket may be exhausted and then some. And if it's not available, then they say, well, and also there may be other people that need raises at the same time. So like, well, we could give this person a raise up to market, but then these 80 other people are going to get nothing for 6 months.
That's usually the reason.
Yeah, they're just trying to pace it out to accommodate for the fact that there's a finite budget available for that kind of thing.
Yeah, so since you mentioned the word budget, I feel like a lot of hiring managers would use that word during negotiation to, get you not to keep trying to negotiate more. Like, this is what we can pay you, and that's it. Like, how do you get out of that?
That was my question.
Yeah. All right. So the question was, what do you do when the word budget is used as a blocker for continuing a negotiation? So again, this is I like this question because the answer is your minimum acceptable salary. That's the answer, right? So you already know what the line is. So they're saying budget. There are a million reasons that they could start kind of pushing back, right? But the bottom line is what they're saying is we're willing to come up to here, but not to here because of budget or whatever.
I mean, I feel like they just use it as a negotiation upper hand, really, but.
And they might. I mean, I think they do. I personally didn't. I like to just kind of just talk about numbers. But if they mention budget, it comes down to have they met your minimum acceptable salary? If yes, then continue negotiating and see how hard you can push them. And if no, then walk away. Or actually, if no, you don't walk away. You say you have to meet my minimum acceptable salary and walking away. The budget thing is, I think it's just a veil for how they're negotiating, right? And so you're going to counter, and they're going to come back, and if they're above your minimum, then you're going to push up as high as you can get, and that's it. Now, I don't want to trivialize your question, but the answer to your question is the minimum acceptable salary. That's the answer. Is that either they're at that line or they're not, and if they can't meet that line, you walk away with budget or no budget, whatever. Not your problem. Right? Other questions? All right, we got one more.
I read something just like a week ago about negotiating and not to use round numbers, but instead to use, so instead of 80,000, you do 81.5, because it indicates or should indicate that you have done enough research to really nail down the amount that you're looking for. Do you think that makes a difference at all?
In my experience, it doesn't. I can't, but I don't have data on that. So that seems to me like a question that you would answer with lots of data. It sounds like a question for payscale.com. They love data. They have reams and reams of data. And so that sounds like a question that they could answer. My guess is that if it has a material effect, it's very small. But for me personally, what I'm thinking about right now is, as a hiring manager, has that ever affected me? And the answer is, I don't think so. And the reason is that I know what I'm willing to pay, right? I know what my range is, and it's got round numbers and pointy numbers, both. And so I don't know. My guess is that it doesn't have much of an effect. It could have a tiny effect, but my guess is that your time and energy are probably better spent elsewhere than trying to find like the exact right number of numbers that will like persuade them to give you a few more dollars or you can, and if you're trying to signal, if you're trying to communicate some level of proficiency or expertise, there are better ways you probably could do that too. So the answer is I don't know, but my guess is that it probably doesn't matter too much. And I wouldn't worry about it.
Any other questions? Cool.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'll be around for a while here. You know how to find me online, so reach out if you have questions. Check out my video courses if you're interested. I think they will help you. I'm really happy with them. And find me on Twitter or shoot me an email if you have any questions.
Thank you.